So I got my driving permit when I was 15, like everybody else, and I was like a really self-conscious new driver, and I was always afraid that I was doing something wrong. And I would always question myself at the wheel and like be afraid other drivers were judging me. So I'm getting really anxious also for my actual driving test because there's this infamous, mean butthead at the DMV. He was Hawaiian Ed, and he had like a ponytail. He wore like those big Hawaiian like floral shirts. Everyone knew who he was. He was like infamous for being just so mean. He would take off points like nobody's business. And I was really nervous. We roll up to the DMV, and I got the mean guy. Ed was my tester. So I'm terrified. I'm like so nervous. And so we get in the car, and I pass all those like little like do you know your hand signals, like your turn signals? Can you like put your hazard lights on? Do you know where the windshield wipers are? Like basic things like can you operate a vehicle and not like die? So like I passed that with like flying colors. I'm good to go. So I was feeling pretty confident. So it was time to leave the parking lot. So we left the parking lot, and we made a right and then another right. And so we pull up to the curb for the part where you back up along the curb. And then he was like, go ahead and put the car in park. So I put the car in park, and I like look at him. And then he like slams his hands on the dashboard, like literally so hard. I like jump backwards, and he was like, you always have to use your parking brake. And like yelled, and so I was already like really scared, so then I almost cried, but I didn't cry. So I was like really shaky after that. Like I did everything right at that point, so that was okay. And then we had to turn out of that area and then turn left into like two-way traffic at the stop sign. And it was like a pretty continuous traffic flow, so like there's no way I'm getting out of there. So we sit there for like a long time, like a few minutes. We're just sitting there, which is a long time when you have this guy next to you just breathing heavily and scribbling stuff on his clipboard, like checking off things and circling and numbers and comments. So I'm just sitting there with my hands like, gripped on the steering wheel, like, oh my God, he's writing, like worst driver, like indecisive. Like I was just thinking of all the things he was probably writing, psyching myself out, so scared, my heart's racing. There's this truck turning left, so I'm protected from the left. And then there's kind of like a pause in the flow of traffic from the right. So I'm like, perfect, I'll do it. So I go and make a quick turn, and it's definitely not okay. Like the car from the right had to like slow down a little bit. They didn't have to stop, but they had to slow down. And so I was like, oh, okay, like dodge that bullet, I'm good. But apparently it's like a dangerous maneuver, and that means that you've like endangered like, your life and the life of your tester. And so he was like, go ahead and make a right, like really nicely. And I was like, cool, like I totally rocked that one. And then he was like, oh, by the way, congratulations, you failed your driving test, report back to the DMV, like super sarcastically. So I drive back to the DMV, and it was like the hardest, oh my God, it was so awful because I knew I was just driving back to like doom. And then we turned into the parking lot, and he was like, go ahead and park on the last stall on the right. And like I said, I was a new driver, so I didn't know what a stall was. I didn't know that was like slang for a parking spot. So I was looking for an actual stall, like a horse stall in the parking lot. And I didn't see one, so I drove past the last one. And he was like, oh great, you messed that one up too. Just go ahead and put the car in park. So at that point, I just completely miserably failed like every expectation this guy had, including just knowing what terminology was for a parking spot. So I was just, great. And then he kind of yelled at me for a while in the car and drew me like a diagram of everything that I'd gotten wrong, and he like circled stuff, and then I just eventually, I couldn't hold it in, I just started to like cry. So I was like basically sobbing like really loudly, like on the steering wheel, just like my head over it. And then he felt bad, I guess, so then he kind of just bounced, and so I was crying, and my mom came back, and she was like, how'd you do? Well, obviously I failed, Patricia, because I'm weeping. Like, so I was really pissed about that. And so she drove me home, and I was like hysterically crying, so I was like really shaky. I thought my life was over. I thought I was gonna have to hire a chauffeur for the rest of my life to drive me around. Like, I was freaking out. And so when we got out of the car, I was like, I had been crying so hard, and I was being such a drama queen that I like fell, like I couldn't walk, so I fell out of the car like on the side. So my driving test ended with me on the pavement of my driveway, like covered in pine needles, like crying on the pavement. And it was a really bad day, but eventually I passed and I can drive now, legally.